Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here, as always, with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, I still have the same job I had when I woke up this morning, so that's somewhat unusual around Columbus these days, apparently.
Very unusual. Unfortunately, Tom, you also have you don't get to sit at home and get paid and not work, which
Well, I mean, some people look at podcasting as more closely akin to that, but not. I don't technically get to do that now, and it doesn't pay as well as not getting paid not to work in the college football coaching business.
Yeah, and so Tom and I we had some listener question shows that we're going to be parsing out, and as always, when breaking news happens, we will cover it. And there's been a bunch of stuff happening on Thursday at Ohio State. Thursday, Bloody Thursday, perhaps, Tom? Is that the
Yeah, they in the NFL it's called Black Monday. This was kind of like Black Thursday, and it was not the Black Thursday I expected. I thought maybe last week was going to be the week we heard about all this stuff, and then it sort of dragged on. And I think we've talked about this on a show pretty recently, but it was like you kept hearing this different stuff, and it was like, this is very weird. Like, it feels like no one actually knows what's going to happen yet, because you kept hearing different stuff from different people. And then once the stuff all broke this morning and you sort of started hearing some context around, how that all went down, it was like, oh, a bunch of people literally didn't know what was going to happen until literally Thursday morning when it all happened.
Yeah, and so let's just lay it out what has happened. So the first bit of news came from Ohio State hiring Cincinnati defensive back cornerbacks coach Perry Eliano. Not quite sure whether he's going to be corners or safeties at Ohio State. I know Pete Thamel said safeties. We'll see about that. Then word broke that Kerry Coombs and Al Washington would not be returning to Ohio State in 2022. Then before the afternoon hit, Tim Walton was reported as being Ohio State's next secondary hire. And so that's where we are right now. In with Perry Eliano and Tim Walton, out with Kerry Coombs and Al Washington, and still not sure what's going to happen special teams wise. Parker Fleming is still out there as Ohio State special teams coordinator. There's some talk about that maybe going to somebody else, or does Ryan Day want to use that spot for a defensive coach? And I know there are a lot of people who think that's essentially a wasted position, having a full-time special teams coordinator. Many other teams do it, but if you've got problems like Ohio State has had on defense, like maybe you need as many hands as possible, even though you're bringing in Jim Knowles to fix it. So maybe you're satisfied with the hires that you've made at this point, and you're going to let it ride and see what happens. But a crazy day that it changed day by day in terms of who was coming back, who was out. There were days where Larry Johnson was done. Then it's like, no, he's back. And Al Washington's done. But now he's back. No, he's done. And I'm with you, Tom. It was because Ryan Day didn't even know, I don't think, in terms of what exactly he was going to do. And it sounds like he gave Kerry Coombs and Al Washington opportunity to stay if they wanted, or opportunity to provide some feedback. And you just wait. And it sure seemed like today Ryan Day got tired of waiting.
Yeah. And, we to your point about hearing different things, I've shared on the podcast before that I heard before the Rose Bowl that a certain coach was definitely going to be back. And then partway through the game heard that, no, he was probably not going to be back. And I didn't put a name on it at the time, but now that he's gone, I can tell you that was Kerry Coombs. That was like before the game. It was like, it sounds like he's very much going to be back. And then halfway through, it was all of a sudden like, no, he's not going to be back. And I put that in our group text and immediately got a bunch of like, oh, come on, the first half wasn't that bad kind of responses, joking responses. And then after the game, there he was on the field, like you said, taking pictures with the other assistants. It was like, oh, I think he really might be gone. And then, but it just sort of lingered for another week and a half. Like there was really some decision making going on. And, there's been some talk about would Al Washington potentially be going to help with the defensive line some if Jim Knowles was going to be kind of running the linebacker room? Did he want to do that? And that was maybe one of the sort of the decisions that he was sort of making. And you've sort of heard his name linked with Notre Dame a little bit. So was he potentially trying to use a Notre Dame job to squeeze another raise out of Ohio State, or was he legitimately deciding between those two things? But this being the second year in a row where you sort of heard his name linked to another job. Last year it was the Tennessee defensive coordinator job, and he got a nice raise out of Ohio State to stick around last year and not be the Tennessee defensive coordinator. Well, if you're sort of being indecisive or you don't want to do, what Jim Knowles or Ryan Day's vision for your role with the company, with the program is, then at some point, like, you've got to kind of crap or get off the pot and make that decision. And if he wasn't willing to make that decision got made for him, because Kerry Coombs' contract was up. Would Kerry Coombs get his contract renewed at a new spot, or would he leave? Al Washington has another year on his contract. So Kerry Coombs was, he wasn't renewed. Al Washington was fired. That's what that means. If you have another year on your contract and you didn't resign, you got fired. Now, the good news is you're going to make a whole bunch of money for not working next year, or you're going to, get paid by Ohio State and also work somewhere else. But, that to me is a pretty clear indication that Ryan Day was just kind of like, nope, I think we're done here.
Yeah. And there's plenty of fish in the sea. I think it will be interesting with Ohio State hiring Perry Eliano. Will then Kerry Coombs just go back to Cincinnati? Is this just a 1-for-1 trade between Ryan Day and Luke Fickell? And if it is, like, Luke Fickell can't feel too bad about that situation if that's what he ends up with. But in terms of Eliano coming from Cincinnati, you look at the numbers that the Bearcats were able to put up in the secondary, and just even aside from the fact that the Cincinnati's two corners, Kobe Bryant, the Thorpe Award winner, and Sauce Gardner being arguably the top corner in the draft. I mean, that's pretty good development job by him, because it's not like they're recruiting 5-star dudes. They're recruiting, I think Gardner was the number 1,500 player in his class, something like that. So there's quite a bit of development there. But so the Bearcats this year finished with the nation's best pass efficiency defense, number 2 defense in passing yards allowed, number 3 defense in interceptions and yards per attempt, and a number 4 defense in opponent completion percentage. So you've got some of the old-timey passing yards allowed stats, but you've got some of the more important yards per attempt and passer rating stats as well, that they're high up in there. And he was a significant part of making that happen. And I know that's Luke Fickell's defense. And before that, it was, sometimes that's Marcus Freeman's defense or whatever. But, clearly he has done well at Cincinnati and has had a little bit of a jumbled career. Spent a lot of time in the Southwest, Texas, and that area, and then came up to Bowling Green, and was actually at New Mexico for a couple of years and was an interim head coach there for a bit before heading to Cincinnati, I believe. So he's been around. He's been really productive of late. And the word that Mark Givler got from his sources in Cincinnati saying this is they think it's really good for Ohio State and really bad for Cincinnati.
Yeah, I'm planning on having our old buddy Mick Walker on the Morning Scoop for Friday this week. And because he had DM'd me, like, as soon as this went down, he's like, it was just like amazing hire, like incredible guy, amazing hire. Mick, if you don't remember, left Buckeye Scoop and is now covering Cincinnati football. So he is very closely affiliated with Perry Eliano, knows him well. And so he is, he's going to be, I'm going to be interested to talk to Mick about exactly why he's such a good recruiter, such a good position coach. But, Cincinnati fans are not going to like this, but this is Perry Eliano getting called up to the majors. And I know Cincinnati was in the playoff. I'm aware, yep. I don't think anyone can seriously, with a straight face, argue that Cincinnati is a program at the level of Ohio State on a 5, 10, 15, 20-year time horizon. 20 years from now, I will make any Cincinnati fan who wants to bet me an even money bet. Ohio State will be a better, higher ranked football program 20 years from now than Cincinnati. If anyone wants to take that action, you can find me on Twitter. But this is an opportunity for Eliano to move up. And if Kerry Coombs does go back to Cincinnati, which makes a ton of sense, and that's not anything that's official yet, but it's just like it would fit perfectly. He can go be a position coach. He can go recruit like crazy for Luke Fickell. That probably works out pretty well for both programs. That is not, losing Eliano obviously was a blow for Cincinnati. But if they get Kerry Coombs back, and Kerry Coombs can go be a position coach, ace recruiter for Cincinnati, that would be a pretty big consolation prize, I guess, for Luke Fickell and his staff.
Yeah, especially with Cincinnati eventually heading to the Big 12, be able to recruit Texas again for he's had success there, and there's certainly a future for him if he wants it. It just always felt like once the demotion happened, you started to hear stuff like he doesn't want to come back, or was this a bridge too far, or is this going to be something that was unforgivable? And then time seemed to pass, and it's like, okay, it seems like things have healed, and Ryan Day would like to have him back, and then it didn't happen, and so the move was made. The other addition is former Buckeye cornerback Tim Walton, played in the early 90s. His senior year was 1993, to give you an idea. And when it's very painful when Buckeyes that you grow up watching, you look at their Wikipedia page and it says they're 50 years old.
Mm-hmm. I had someone text me like, isn't he a little old? I was like, no, he was college. I remember him playing in college. Like he was at Ohio State. He was a captain in like 1993. He's only what, like 45, 46. And I looked it up. He's like, oh, he's 50. Like, oh, well, first of all, I Googled Tim Walton age and got someone who was in his, I think 60s, who was apparently a Florida softball coach or something. And then, okay, Tim Walton, Jaguars age. Okay. Yeah. Then we got it. Yeah. That was like that's interesting. He's someone who, I have seen quotes from Jalen Ramsey floating around that this is the greatest cornerbacks coach in the history of the universe. And, my question with NFL guys coming back to college is always, so how is this kind of guy going to be recruiting? Like, if you have that kind of, if you can go in there with that little printed out quote and say, look what Jalen Ramsey said about me, like that should, help with landing some recruits. But this is someone who has not had to recruit for a long time. Like he was an assistant under Nick Saban when Nick Saban was at LSU. Like that has been a hot minute. That has been a while. So, Perry Eliano, I think is much more of a sure thing than Tim Walton. Tim Walton is you can spin yourself a very easy narrative that this is someone who is a good position coach, played at Ohio State, local former captain comes home and is now an assistant coach. And it's a wonderful story. I always, when a guy comes, who has not had to recruit for a long time, comes back to college, I'm always in a little bit sort of the show me mode. Like, okay, let's see how this goes recruiting wise. But, it is definitely, this has the opportunity to be a very, very positive move for Ohio State as well.
Yeah. And he's a guy, you mentioned the LSU stint. He was there for a year. Then he went to Miami for a few years. He's been on the radar, the Ohio State coaching sphere radar for like ever. And then his last college job was Memphis in 2008. Then he went to the NFL, and you still hear about him and still would show up on hot boards, but it's been a long time since you've had to recruit. And in my opinion, Tom, the landscape of recruiting has changed, you could say
a little bit. Yeah.
So you're going to be walking into a brand new world. But he does have these guys can come in and say, I was in the NFL. Look who I've coached. I've done this. I've done that. And so that's you've got it's an interesting pairing. You've got the college guy with Eliano. You've got the NFL guy with Walton. Put them together, and now maybe that's the exact kind of combination you want. And Hafley came from the NFL and turned out to be. What kind of recruiting experience do you have? Not much, but he turned out to be pretty good. I remember asking Urban Meyer, like, how do you know Bill Davis is going to be able to recruit?
Mm-hmm.
And, you have Urban Meyer. So, well, we've got me. We don't need the linebackers coach to recruit linebackers, but it's a concern, and it's not for everybody. That's why Mike Vrabel ran away and went to the NFL and has obviously succeeded there. And I still always chuckle when people bring him up as Ryan Day's replacement one day, and I just don't see it. I don't see him on the phone with 17-year-olds, 10:30 at night, trying to convince them, just come visit. Just come visit.
Yeah. And I think it's just a personality thing because, you look at Luke Fickell and Mike Vrabel, and they were both very successful head coaches. They were both Ohio State defensive linemen at the same exact time in the early to mid 90s. They were friends when they were in college. They played right next to each other when they were in college. They both, sort of climbed the coaching ranks. Vrabel had an NFL stint that Fickell didn't really have, but Fickell has climbed the coaching ranks and is gotten pretty close to the pinnacle of his profession. And Vrabel has climbed the coaching ranks and is now the head coach of a NFL playoff team. And those are, and the Titans are like a Super Bowl contender this year. That is, they are both very good at their jobs. Fickell has really thrived in the coaching in the college level because he is someone who is just willing to do the recruiting work. Being a college head coach is kind of a pain in the butt. Like the NFL, like you give a guy a contract and you maybe take him out to dinner and you show him around the facility or whatever, but that's it. Like it is not a 18 to 24 to 30 month process to woo a free agent tight end to come to your team in the same way it is to try to, hey, like there are 2024 recruits that we're talking about right now that Ohio State assistants are like trying to talk to and build relationships with. Like, this is not like it's a weekend and we gotta bring this guy in for a weekend visit and we're going to show him around and have dinner and yada yada yada. This is a long-term process, and these are not grown adults who are making millions of dollars. These are high school kids. Like this can be something that is not necessarily appealing to everyone. So that's why it's always like, that doesn't mean Mike Vrabel's a bad coach. That doesn't mean that Luke Fickell is a better coach. It just means they're kind of coaches who want to do different things. And Tim Walton has not done this in a while. He's done it before, but as you said, the game has kind of changed. Now, having coached in the SEC before, more unofficial NIL deals he may be at least somewhat familiar with some of the more unofficial NIL deals, may have predated the legislation. But still, this is a long time ago. This is a very different landscape in college sports. So yeah, it is not, this is not a value judgment on anyone. It's just like, this is a different job than your job before. I'm interested to see how it goes. But, on paper, this makes a lot of sense. Let's, now let's see how the recruiting piece of it goes.
Yeah, he coached the last 3 years at Jacksonville. He is from Georgia himself. He's coached at Miami. I wonder, if you've been out of college that long, but you coached at Jacksonville, do you still have like contacts in the state? Like, do you still know people? I think it probably depends on how active are you in the community, that sort of thing, or in the area. Like what kind of outreach programs have you had with high school coaches and things like that? Do you even stay with it? And if you've been an NFL coach that long, why would you? It's not something where I need to keep my Rolodex going. Rolodex kids, it's a list of contacts on paper.
It's like a card catalog, but for phone numbers. Hopefully that helps.
I don't think it does, Tom. But so I wonder if this has been something he's been thinking about, or if this is an opportunity to get away from Jacksonville, which anybody, sure, Ohio State, sure, I'll take it. Whatever. I don't care who it is. What is it? Analyst, QC, just what is it? But
is it with the football program? Even better. Great.
But you look at his career, and he's been a defensive coordinator a couple of times, actually a few times. He was defensive coordinator for 1 year for Randy Shannon at Miami, and then I don't think that went well because the next year he's in Memphis as a defensive coordinator. The year after that, he's in Detroit.
Memphis, the traditional landing spot for defensive coordinators who it didn't go great.
Yeah. And then so he was a defensive coordinator for the Rams in 2013, and then wasn't in coaching in 2014, according to his Wikipedia page. So I guess he's probably an analyst for Nick Saban in 2014.
That's well within the realm of possibilities. A former Nick Saban assistant with a gap year on his resume, Nick Saban's home for wayward coaches is always a possibility.
Because then he shows back up in 2015 for the Giants, and yeah, like I said, this is a guy that's been on the radar for a while. You wonder, would he ever find his way to Ohio State? Sounds like he has. I think if this had happened, it was like 15 years ago, maybe it's like a bigger thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not poo-pooing it. It's like I'm definitely willing to see how it goes, see how he does. I'm like, who bats 1,000 on coaching hire opinions? Nobody. So right, I think it's a pretty interesting mix for sure, with the college guy and Eliano and the NFL guy, and Tim Walton, and Walton obviously former Buckeye. So that, like, he's not just an NFL guy. He's had his foot in several of these little areas in college. So I think it's a good fit. And really, how much impact do you think Jim Knowles has had through all of this?
Well, I think I would suspect that Jim Knowles has had some substantial input on this, because you're going to want to know, you know what you want to run and how you want to run it, and you have to have assistants who know how to run what you want to run. I mean, that was one of the lessons that Ryan Day probably learned the hard way the last couple of years was, hey, I want to run this defense. I'm going to bring in a defensive coordinator. He's never run it before, but I'm sure it'll work out fine. Like, Ron Howard narrator voice. It did not work out fine, and so now it seems like he's maybe given Jim Knowles a little bit more latitude to, okay, this is your baby, go do it. And Jim Knowles is getting paid a lot of money to do it. So yeah, I think Jim Knowles probably had a decent hand in this. And, the mixture of the guy with the longtime college background and then the NFL guy, it reminds me a little bit of when they brought in Jeff Hafley and Greg Mattison to coach the defense in 2019. And you had the longtime college assistant in Greg Mattison, who had run defenses before, but was not he was not really the guy who was officially in charge, but was there to sort of help out with the college pieces of the puzzle that Jeff Hafley wasn't maybe familiar with. And then Jeff Hafley was kind of the defensive wizard, and but didn't really have the college background. So you have Madison to kind of help with that piece of it. I wonder if you may have a little bit of that with Walton and Eliano on the back end of the defense now, because you have the longtime college guy. You've got, Walton can, obviously handle the position, the position coaching portion of it. Eliano may be able to help with some of the recruiting pieces and getting him up to speed with that kind of stuff. And that may all be, that may sort of be the thinking there with bringing in kind of, two guys with somewhat different backgrounds to work together. So, and you know what, I mean, the Hafley Madison thing worked out just great. If this hire worked out as well as the Hafley and Madison hire worked out, I think Ryan Day will be very, very happy with it.
Yeah, we all knew that changes were going to be coming. And have we gone over the over-under yet?
I think the over-under was 3.5. And so, yes, we're over now because Barnes, Stud, Washington and Combs. So yeah, and that was, I mean, go back a couple of weeks and I think you will hear both of us saying like, 3 to 4 is probably about what we're hearing right now. And that, that has held true. The composite, the composition of that 3 to 4 has changed a little bit over time, but, Stud and a couple guys on the defensive side of the ball has been kind of what has been floating out there for a while. And now it's happened. And then, to your point, I'm not 100% confident that this is totally in stone. And this is the coaching staff for this year. It's possible there's another move on the horizon. I don't know that I would say it's 50-50 that there's another move on the horizon, but I would say it's possible there's another mover on the horizon.
Yeah, that's where I am, because Day may have been happy to keep a special teams coordinator, had everything he wanted to fallen in place. If that hasn't happened, then he may still need to go out and fill in somebody somewhere else, and maybe help out Jim Knowles or help out Larry Johnson, or maybe help out them both with somebody that coaches, who knows, just the Leos or whatever, and then is your eventual replacement for Larry Johnson. It's just interesting because at some point, I think you look at this entire Ohio State coaching staff, and how many of them were not mentioned as possibilities leaving. I mean, even Brian Hartline was talked about the Notre Dame thing. Tony Alford had to like deny his own interest in Akron or Colorado State. Kevin Wilson was like, I didn't even know. Thanks for putting my name in the Akron stuff, but I'm happy at Ohio State. Ryan Day with the Bears stuff. Like, there has been nobody on this staff except for maybe Parker Fleming, the special teams coordinator.
Yeah,
Corey Dennis. Yeah, there we go. Mm-hmm. But even then, it's like, would he eventually head to Jacksonville or Colorado State should one of the Ohio State guys go? So yeah, you've had almost the entire staff mentioned in some form or fashion, and but yeah, so it's like I'm not going to be surprised if there's one more move on the defensive side, and because do you again, are we telling stories or telling lies? Larry Johnson's not going to be coaching forever. So do you want somebody to get in there with him, or are you just going to replace him outright when he does finally decide to retire?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're breaking any news here, but I don't believe Larry Johnson is actually immortal. So at some point between now and 2150, Larry Johnson will no longer be the defensive line coach at Ohio State. Exclusive, must credit Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I have always thought it kind of made sense to, if you have an offensive head coach and you have 5 offensive assistants, it feels like if you're going to be short-staffed and have only 4 assistants on one side of the ball, it should probably be the side of the ball where the head coach is also directly involved in it. Like, that has made a lot of sense to me. That's not what they're doing right now. They have, 5 offensive assistants plus Ryan Day. So you pretty much have 6 guys on the offensive side of the ball, 4 on the defensive side of the ball, and then Parker Fleming on special teams. So, that has been a point of contention with Ohio State fans, with some people, it is a little odd to have that kind of imbalance on your staff. Now they seemingly may be addressing it through some support staff hires that they also made on Thursday. Michael Hunter and Coy Mcfarland, who both worked under Knowles at Oklahoma State. Those guys are both now, there's a report from Football Scoop that those guys are now both coming to Ohio State as well. Coy Mcfarland was the guy who took over for Jim Knowles and coached the linebackers in the Fiesta Bowl. So I'm sure Mike Gundy is an even bigger fan of Ohio State football now than he was before this all broke on Thursday afternoon. But, that has been the question to me is, you only have 4 defensive assistants, and you're also not making use of like analysts and in a way that like Alabama does. Like Nick Saban has this just like war room of former head coaches who, they can't do on-field coaching, but they can do a lot of game planning and strategizing and scheming and film breakdowns and all that kind of stuff. Ohio State has not really done a whole lot with that. They had one on the offensive side of the ball, Todd, now I'm going to blank on his name again, former Vanderbilt offensive coordinator, Todd something or other. Fitch. Thank you very much. Todd Fitch on the offensive side of the ball, and former Iowa State defensive coordinator, Paul Rhodes, on the defensive side of the ball. You can bring in more of those guys. And it sounds like maybe they're bringing in more of those guys this year to sort of flesh out that staff a little bit. That seems like it's a real opportunity to just get more good football minds in the room, have more, more man hours to break down film, look at schemes, all that kind of stuff. And, these are, we had talked about, Jim Knowles, potentially, maybe he's going to want to bring in some of his guys. Sounds like as of right now, he's not doing that for any of the, 10 counting assistant head coaching spots, but he is for some of the other, kind of the support staff roles, which, yeah, you should do more of that. Like you are Ohio State football. You have lots of money. You should be using it to bring in more smart football people to help put your game plans together and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, he was also bringing in another QC guy that he had at Oklahoma State, from what I was told. Tom, does this affect your thoughts at all on Tim Walton? This from our buddy Marcus Hartman on Twitter. All of Ohio State's starting cornerbacks from 1993 to 1999 were drafted except for one, Tim Walton.
That's fascinating. That is quite a stat. I mean, he's spent plenty of time in the NFL now, so I would guess that he's probably had a longer NFL career than most of those other NFL cornerbacks. Maybe let's see, Sean Springs might have had a longer career.
Antoine Winfield.
Ahmed Plummer was a starter, was in the NFL for quite a while. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But there's he's ended up doing just fine for himself. But that's an interesting little nugget there.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I think this puts to rest the idea that Ryan Day is just some softy who won't make the decisions that need to be made, and is certainly tired of wasting offense, because Ohio State has an outstanding offense that other programs would love to have, and they don't have the defense to match. And so this is moving towards that solution. And really, the amount of change, if it's not better, I would be shocked. Like, if the defense is not better, I mean, now you've hired a second defensive staff that essentially does not work well together, does not scheme well together. And at that point, Ryan Day is just going to be like, do I need a search committee? Is that what I need at this point? And you have to start doubting your ability to hire defensive staffs. But everybody loves Jim Knowles. And so I think, there's been no bad words about him, nobody like poo-pooing it. So I'm interested to see how it goes. Aggression, that's always the answer, Tom. We know Don Brown said it, solve your problems with aggression.
Yeah, I feel like this is Ryan Day learning from his previous mistakes, where he had something he wanted to do and he had a guy he wanted, and it was just like, well, we'll just mix these two things together and I'm sure it'll be fine. Go get the guy who, is running a defense that kind of matches your personnel already, but the defense that he knows that he wants to run, that he has put together and developed over the years himself, let him bring in some of his people to help run it. And then, take the talent level that he was working with last year and increase it by about 2 steps. That seems like it's a recipe for success. And, this is modern college football. I'm sure they're not going to give up 3.5 points a game next year, but, and this is also supposedly a very complex defense. That's something you kind of hear is this is not necessarily something that just from day one is going to be locked down. But if it's better year one, and then even better than that in year 2, okay, then you're kind of onto something, and you're really, you're really setting yourself up for some, to hit some of those long-term goals that you have. And it doesn't have to be perfect this year. Like, they have a good enough offense that if the defense is just like good, 15th, 20th in the nation, like just good, that's probably plenty to get you at least, back to the college football national championship game, minimally college football playoff, probably college football national playoff game. National championship game. And, once you're there, if you have a really good offense and a pretty good defense, like, well, we haven't seen Ohio State with a pretty good defense in a couple of years. And, if you can get there, that seems like you are, you at least have a puncher's chance to win the national championship at that point, which that's not so bad. That's a pretty good season if you're at that point.
Yeah. And it's interesting to me that when you have Ohio State's offense, that there is a standalone special teams coordinator. And I'm generally, I generally attack the critics of that. Like, well, why nobody else has a special teams coordinator, which isn't true. Plenty of other programs do. But if you have Ohio State's offense, and I wrote this on the Ask the Insiders message board today, you've got an offense that doesn't really matter whether they're starting 75 or 85 yards away from the opposing end zone. I know you have the percentages, and if you start from here, 85% of the time is this. But when you have an offense that can move the ball, I don't know that 10 yards necessarily is that much of a difference. And if your defense needs help, then like if you help your defense, then the need for that extra inch in the field position wouldn't seem to be as great. Now, maybe the confidence in Jim Knowles has Ryan Day to the point of like, no, I think we're good here. And then we can just have one guy focus on special teams. And then Parker Fleming, or who, he also helps on in the secondary. That's what he did this past year. That's what he's done since he's been hired. He's like a third coach in the secondary as well. But it's with an offense like they have, it's just interesting to me that there is still such a concern for field position. And yes, that is Urban Meyer's plan to win. It was handed down to Ryan Day. It is now Ohio State's plan to win. But when you lead a nation in total offense, I don't know that it matters between a 25 and 35, really.
Right. Yeah. I mean, how big of a difference does 10 yards of field position make? Well, Ohio State averaged 8 yards per play this season. So it's like about a play and a quarter. So, I don't think, I think the plan to win is the Urban Meyer plan to win may be based. I'm going to be very diplomatic here. The Urban Meyer plan to win, which involves punting and playing field position and looking at the percentage of time that a team is going to score from their own 5-yard line versus their own 10-yard line versus their own 15-yard line, it may be based on an older paradigm in which Ohio State does not have a quarterback who is particularly good at throwing the football. If CJ Stroud is going to make it rain for 500 yards and 6 touchdowns every game, just kick the ball through the frickin' goalposts on every kickoff and go play at least some defense and then just beat people 50-20. Like, that's a thing you can do. And it is a thing that Ohio State absolutely has the talent to do. And you need to not kick field goals, because kick field goals generally don't do you a whole heck of a lot of good. Like, you need to be going for touchdowns a lot, and you need to be calling plays with a 4-down mindset a lot, where I'm not saying you need to go for it on 4th and 8 from your own 15, but like, if you're at midfield and it's, 3rd and 6, like, just plan on taking 2 cracks at it. Like, you've got an offense that on average is going to get 8 yards per play. So seems like you should be able to get 6 in 2 cracks. Like, that just seems like a thing you could do. So I will be interested to see whether the plan to win maybe gets a little bit of a firmware update this year, because Ryan Day has been better than Urban Meyer about not punting in like obvious, that's a stupid time to punt situations. So I don't want this to come off as criticism of Ryan Day, because I really do think he has done a progressively better job with being, a little bit more open-minded about that stuff as his tenure has gone along. But if you were still, dusting off the 2014 plan to win binder, like, the game done changed, son.
You know who had the fewest punts nationally this season? Which program in college football?
That's a great question. I am going to say, Ohio State's got to be up there. They've really got to be up there because they scored so many points, and I'm going to say Ohio State, but if it's not Ohio State's in the top 5.
It is, in fact, Ohio State. 31 punts.
Yep, there you go.
In 13 games. That's second fewest is UCLA. Do you know who their offensive coordinator is?
I believe it's Justin Fry. Yes, who is now Ohio State's new offensive line coach. Seems good.
That's interesting. Yeah, so you don't punt that much. You don't need the extra 10 yards from whatever in field position. So maybe give the defense some help, but that's whatever. Sometimes I'm just a contrarian when it comes to like the whole group think about, but Alabama doesn't do it. And that immediately is like, I have to combat this. Nick Saban would never. But that's one of my sports pet peeves or fatal flaws or best parts of my character. Tom,
Nick Saban in 2022, 0-1. Ryan Day in 2022, 1-0. Science. That's
analytics. People. Mm-hmm. I think that will do it then, Tom. Is that correct?
That will do it. Yes.
That will do it. All right. I want to thank you all for joining us for this emergency episode as Ryan Day has cleaned the defensive house at Ohio State, brought in 2 new secondary coaches and bid adieu to longtime assistant Kerry Coombs and linebackers coach Al Washington. And it's going to be an interesting spring to see how all of this gels, and it won't by the spring. So don't worry. It's going to be a messy spring as the defense tries to figure out what they're doing, who can do what, how can they do it, and how well they can do it. So I'm still looking forward to it, though, and want to thank you all for joining us. That will do it for today's show. We will be back tomorrow with some fantastic listener questions. You'll love it. Trust me, it's fantastic. Thanks, and we will see you later.